Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace or do they have more sinister motives? Join your host, Mad Mark, as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that have puzzled mankind for centuries on Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark. Today's episode, the real story of Abraham, what the Bible doesn't tell you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. I'm Mad Mark, and today we continue our studies of Zecharia Sitchin's third book, The Wars of Gods and Men, published by Avon Books in 1985. As promised, I'll get to the real story of Abraham in just a moment. One thing that I would like to mention is that at the end of the last episode, I had mentioned that Abraham was present at the site of the great catastrophe that led to the mass exodus of the Anunnaki from Earth. That was a misprint. It was his nephew Lot that was present at that event. But we'll get into all of that down the road. Sorry for the mistake. Okay, on to the next topic. On today's edition of Stupid People Doing Stupid Things, I mentioned on an earlier episode that Christian extremists were responsible for defacing many of the ancient Egyptian artifacts when Rome conquered Egypt 2,000 years ago. But Christians aren't the only ones responsible for destroying ancient artifacts. Here we see footage of Muslim extremists doing the same things to ancient Sumerian artifacts and temples in Iraq in 2014. The same as the Christian extremists did a couple thousand years earlier, they destroyed ancient, historic, irreplaceable, and priceless artifacts, temples, and ziggurats, all in the name of their God. Artifacts from many of the sites that I talk about on this program. In the case of these 2014 attacks, it was their own country's history and heritage senselessly destroyed. Now again, these heinous acts were performed by extremists, not your typical Christians or Muslims who I'm sure find this destruction just as appalling as you and I do. And I'm sure that in both cases, these men were simply following orders. The order came from someone higher up. Someone in charge, someone who had something to gain by destroying evidence from the past, evidence of an advanced culture and its gods, evidence of the Anunnaki. The Creator does not destroy, it creates. Anyone who wants you to destroy anyone or anything in its name is not the Creator of the universe. It doesn't make mistakes. If it created a person, place, or thing, then those things were put there for a reason. It is never our job to destroy something that the Creator has created. You know, we're always taught that God is love. All religions echo that sentiment. God is love. God is love. You hear it all over. Well, maybe it's time we stopped worshiping these gods and just started worshiping love. Or, before you commit any act in the name of a god, ask yourself if that act is coming in love. Because I'll tell you one thing right now, love would never tell you to destroy something. Love would never have you kill anyone or anything. And love sure as hell would never ask you to hate another person simply because they look different than you or worship different than you. If you are told by anyone to destroy a person, place, or thing, then that person telling you that is not acting on the words of love or the universe. If the Creator of the universe wants something or someone destroyed, it could accomplish that task with a wave of its hand. It wouldn't need you to do it for them. So if you're not walking in love, then you're not walking in spirit, and you're definitely not representing the creator of the universe. And this same philosophy holds true for our political leaders as well. If one candidate or another is always putting down his opponent in order to make himself look better, or always pointing out others' mistakes, then he or she is not walking in love and light. So it's probably time to pick someone else to vote for. Walk in love, walk in truth, and you'll never go wrong. Okay, next topic. You know how I'm always talking about the fact that the Anunnaki are still running things on this planet and that our U.S. government knows all about them? Well, how about this for evidence? There are literally signs everywhere, right in plain sight, that our government not only knows about the Anunnaki, but that they have known for a very long time. For instance, what is this pyramid doing on our $1 bill? And it contains the all-seeing eye of Horus? The government claims that it is supposed to represent strength and duration. And maybe I could believe that if it were just a single event. But what is this? A pyramid in our nation's capital. This, of course, is the Washington Monument. But why not build a statue of the first president, or at least have his face on it somewhere? The official description states that it is indeed a replica of an Egyptian obelisk, and that its design was chosen to evoke the timelessness of ancient civilizations. That's certainly interesting, to reflect our nation's respect and gratitude to Washington. So, in order to show our nation's respect and gratitude for our first president, they built a monument that has nothing to do with him, but instead reflects of timelessness of ancient civilizations? This seems a bit odd to me. And then we have this. On the John Adams Annex to the Library of Congress, also in Washington, is this carving of Thoth. Again, I ask why. It seems that there are many depictions of ancient Egypt all over Washington, D.C. These are but a few examples. But why Egyptian symbolism? Why not Sumerian? Are you forgetting that Marduk did not rise to power until after the Great Flood, around the same time that Egypt Kemet became the second great civilization of the Anunnaki? And who was the most prominent god of Egypt? Amun-Ra, otherwise known as Marduk, the one who has really been in charge of this planet ever since. Yes, our government, as well as all governments around the globe, are more than aware of the Anunnaki. They know who is really running things. The signs are everywhere. Just look around. Okay, so on to our topic for today, Abraham, the patriarch of the Israelites. In the Bible, we read how he was called by God to leave his homeland for the promise of a great nation, the near sacrifice of his son Isaac, and his covenant with God. But there was so much more to this story, so let's dive deeper. Abraham was born in the Sumerian city of Ur in 2123 BC, during the time of the rise and fall of the third dynasty of Ur, and Abraham was right in the middle of it, not as a casual observer, but as an active participant. The Bible tells us at one point Abraham's father Terah took him, his nephew Lot, and his wife Sarah and left Ur. Their original goal was to reach Canaan, but they only made it as far as Haran and dwelt there. But where was this Haran, and why was it important? Haran was situated to the northwest of Mesopotamia in the foothills of the Taurus Mountains, and it was a major crossroads in those days. It controlled the gateway of the northern route to the lands of Western Asia. It was a city which was a mirror image of Ur, and its god was Nanar-Sin, son of Enlil. The small family stayed in Haran for many years, and finally, when Abraham was 75 years old, he was instructed by God to move on to Canaan. But which God was this? One very important note to keep in mind at this point is that all of this was going on at the same time that Marduk was making his push to become the one true God of Earth. We have to keep that in mind moving forward. Sumeria was basically in turmoil and upheaval at that time, and Marduk was wreaking havoc throughout the Middle East, both in Egypt and in Canaan. Why? Because again, whoever controlled the Anunnaki ships coming and going from planet Earth basically controlled the planet. We'll get into all of the events that were taking place at this time in Egypt Kemet later. But what was in Canaan? The Mission Control Center in Jerusalem, and just beyond that, the spaceport in the Sinai. And it was Marduk who instructed Abraham and his family to move there. Oh, and by the way, they were not alone. They were accompanied by an elite Haran military corps. This was at the same time that Marduk was secretly sending weapons and military troops to his followers in Babylon and Mari, areas that he intended to conquer, areas controlled at that time by Enlilite gods Nannar-Sin and Inanna Ishtar. I've talked on past episodes about Marduk's rise to power in Babylon, how thousands of years earlier his efforts to build his own spaceport in Babylon had been crushed by Enlil, the incident known in the Bible as the Tower of Babel. But now, during Abraham's time, Marduk was setting himself up again to forcibly take Babylon back and then to move on westward and conquer Judea and thus control the Mission Control Center in Jerusalem. Marduk may have still been exiled from Mesopotamia, but his eldest son Nabu was there, enlisting converts to his father's cause. And it was in the midst of all this that Marduk instructed Abraham and his troops to move into Canaan. The Old Testament tells us that upon reaching Canaan, Abraham and his group continued southward. There was a stopover at Shechem, just east of Bethel, where Abraham built an altar to Yahweh Marduk and again spoke to him. Bethel, the city whose name meant God's house, in the same vicinity as Mount Moriah and the Mission Control Center located there. Mount Moriah, upon whose sacred rock the Ark of the Covenant was placed when Solomon built the temple to Yahweh in Jerusalem. And then Abraham's group moved on towards Negev, the place where Canaan and the Sinai Peninsula merge. That was clearly Abraham's destination. But what was so special about Negev? It was the gateway to the spaceport in the Sinai. The texts tell us that Abraham had military allies in the region, not to mention the group he was traveling with, which included several hundred elite military men. The Old Testament refers to them as Nar men, or Lunar, meaning camel riders or military men. In describing Abraham's military men as Nar men, the Old Testament thus informs us that he had with him a corps of cavalrymen, riding camels rather than horses, because in the Sinai, camels were better suited to the terrain. The image of Abraham that is emerging from all of this is not one of a sheep-herding desert nomad, but instead that of an innovative military commander of royal descent. And while this may not fit with the customary image of this Hebrew patriarch, it is in accordance with ancient recollections of him. Josephus even wrote about Abraham's military prowess. Yes, Abraham was indeed on a military mission to protect the space facilities, the Mission Control Center, and the spaceport in the name of Yahweh Marduk. After their short stay in Negev, Abraham's troops traversed the Sinai and came into Egypt, where they were at once welcomed into the royal palace. This would have been around the year 2047 BC, a time when the pharaohs ruling northern Egypt were not followers of Amun-Ra Marduk. But these pharaohs were facing a strong challenge from Thebes, where Amen was the supreme deity. We can only imagine what matters of state were discussed at the meetings held between this beleaguered pharaoh and Abraham, the Nippurian general. Alliances, joint defenses, divine commands. But the Bible states that Abraham's group remained in Egypt for 5 years before returning to the Negev. And when he did, he was accompanied by a large contingent of the Pharaoh's men. One side note here, just something that I want you to remember, just tuck it away in the back of your mind for later reference. Abraham's nephew Lot was with him this entire time, the same Lot who was present at the final disaster that led to the mass exodus of the Anunnaki from Earth. Just keep that in mind, because it will all tie together later as more facts about these events unfold. Okay, so at this point, the Bible tells us, and Abraham went from Egypt, he and his wife, and Lot with him, up into the Negev. He was heavy with flocks of sheep and cattle for food and clothing, as well as camels and asses for his fast riders. Again, he went to Bethel to call on the name of Yahweh Marduk, seeking instructions. A separation from Lot followed, the nephew choosing to reside with his own flocks in the plain of the Jordan. So Abraham continued on to the highest peak near Hebron, where he could see in all directions. At this point, Marduk and his son Nabu were busy roaming through eastern Canaan, rounding up supporters and gaining supremacy. And this was the historical time frame in which the Old Testament has fitted the invasion from the east. Hey gang, Mad Mark here to let you know that I now have new t-shirts available for my show, Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth. You can find these cool new shirts by searching Who Are the Aliens shirts on Amazon, or by clicking the link on my website at madmarktv.com. They are available in a variety of sizes and colors, with delivery through Amazon, a name you know and trust. That's the all-new Who Are the Aliens t-shirts, just like the one you see me wearing right here. Get yours now. Seen, of course, from the biblical standpoint of suppressing the other gods and describing everything from a one true God point of view. But either way, it was a most unusual war. The biblically stated truth was that the war was to suppress the rebellion. Does that sound at all like the Galactic Empire from Star Wars to anyone else here? Well, Marduk was sort of a Darth Vader, right? Nabu, I am your father. Abraham, I am your one true God. Jeez, the similarities here are staggering. So, who were these invaders into Canaan? They were the Semitic Amorites from Ur, under the rule of King Amar Sin, and his troops invaded Canaan under the command of their gods Nana Sin, son of Enlil, and his daughter Inanna Ishtar. And the real reason for this invasion? To stop Marduk from gaining a stronghold in Canaan, and even more importantly, the spaceport in the Sinai. I want to clarify here that I am presenting this war at this point from the human perspective, and we will examine it in a lot more detail from the Anunnaki perspective in the future. So, the objective of these invaders was to reach a certain crossroads oasis in the wilderness, but that never happened. Taking the southern route from Mesopotamia into Canaan, the Amorite troops proceeded southward in Transjordan along the King's Highway, attacking in succession key outposts guarding crossing points of the Jordan River. Coming down Transjordan and circling the Dead Sea, the invaders passed by Mount Seir and advanced towards El Paran. But they were forced to swing back by Ein Mishpat in Kadesh because somehow they were beaten back. And it was then, as they turned back towards Canaan, that we read, "Thereupon the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zebaim and the king of Bela marched forth with their troops to engage them in battle at the valley of Siddim. But why had the invading troops been forced to turn back in Kadesh? What stood in their way? To be so close to reaching the spaceport, the real reason for the entire invasion, and then suddenly stop and retreat? Why? The Bible never tells us, but the ancient texts do. It was, in fact, the troops led by Abraham. From the earliest of times, Kadesh Barnea was the closest place where humans could approach the region of the spaceport without special permission, and it was there that Abraham stood with his elite troops blocking the invaders' advance. There are hints of this truth in the Old Testament, but it's in the Kedor Laomer texts where we discover the real truth. This invasion by the Amorites, sent by Nana Sin and Inanna Ishtar, was intended to prevent this latest surge to power of Marduk Ra and to prevent Nabu from gaining access to the spaceport. The assembled gods, led by Nana Sin and Inanna Ishtar, had become more than aware of Nabu's efforts to gain strongholds and support Marduk Ra in the areas of Canaan and the Sinai, the areas containing the spaceport and the Mission Control Center. And this absolutely had to be stopped. Thus, a coalition of royal kings was assembled with Elamite Kudar Langhamar as their military commander. Their first order was to attack Nabu's stronghold in Borsippa. Then it was on to Transjordan. First to be attacked was Rabatum, a stronghold in the highlands. The route was the same one that is referenced in the Old Testament. From the highlands in the north, through the district of Rabat Aman, then southward around the Dead Sea. But then, suddenly, at Dur Ma'elani, the invaders were halted, because the son of the priest, whom the gods had anointed, stood in their way. Abraham and his troops had forced the invaders to turn back. I think that it's relative to mention here at this point that Sodom and Gomorrah were important strongholds of Marduk Ra. He had a lot of supporters and actually headquarters in those cities. Keep that in mind as we go forward as well. So, having carried out his mission to protect the spaceport, Abraham returned to his base near Hebron. But perhaps he should have fought the invaders instead of merely forcing them to turn back, because shortly after that, the Amorite invaders were intercepted by the army of the Canaanite kings that I mentioned earlier, that included the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the invaders defeated this army of kings, and then took with them all of the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, which included a very important hostage, Abraham's nephew, Lot, who just happened to be residing in Sodom in those days. Upon hearing this news, Abraham enlisted his best cavalrymen and took off after the invaders. He finally caught up with them near Damascus, where he released Lot and retrieved all of the stolen property. And upon returning to Jerusalem, he was greeted as a victor. Not long after that, the Canaanite kings also returned to Jerusalem to thank him. Thus, the attack on the spaceport had been thwarted, but the danger to it had not been removed. Marduk was relentless in his latest attempt to seize power, and these other gods were attempting to stop him at every turn, because this was not a normal power grab. His final goal was world domination, to be the only god on planet Earth, the one true God. And the other Anunnaki simply could not tolerate that. They would use whatever power was needed to stop him, and they did. Because 15 years later, Sodom and Gomorrah went up in flames when the doomsday weapon was deployed. And we will begin discussing that terrible tragedy that led to the huge Anunnaki exodus from planet Earth on our next episode. I'm not sure as of yet but it just may be a two-parter. And that is where I will leave you for this episode. You have quite a lot to digest there, and we have so much more to cover and learn. I'm Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. And also, tell your friends and help spread the word about this show. And if you have any questions regarding the content discussed on this program, simply message me through madmarktv.com or on any of my social media platforms. I also wish to remind everyone that listening to this podcast is no excuse to not read the book that we are discussing here, The Wars of Gods and Men by Zecharia Sitchin. It is an amazing work, and I'm leaving out much information in order to keep the show flowing properly. So please do yourselves a favor and read that book. Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth is written and produced by me, Mad Mark. All media used in this episode is done so under the protection of fair use for the purpose of teaching. Today we have taken another step in our ongoing journey to find the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Bye for now. This has been Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to more of the mysteries that puzzle mankind.